You think time is a line, a steady flow, past behind you, future ahead, and you somehow moving through the middle of it. That picture feels so natural you never question it. You imagine clocks measure time. You imagine time passes the same way everywhere. You imagine a second is a second because reality says so. It does not. That is your invention. A useful one. A human one. Because the deeper physics looked, the less time behaved like the thing you were taught to trust. It did not stay universal. It did not stay separate from motion. It did not even stay separate from gravity. And worse than that, it did not stay separate from you. You still think time is happening to the universe, as if reality unfolds inside some larger invisible stream. But what if that picture is backwards? What if time is not the container? What if it is not flowing? What if the thing you call now is not a feature of the universe at all, but a limitation of the kind of mind you have? That is the uncomfortable part. Not that time is strange. You already know that word, strange. Physics is always strange. No. The uncomfortable part is that your most basic intuition may be wrong at the deepest level, not your intuition about black holes, not your intuition about atoms, your intuition about before and after, about sequence, about change, about what it even means for something to happen. And once that starts to fail, reality stops feeling like a story moving forward. It starts feeling like something far less forgiving. The illusion of a flowing present. You think time is moving, not slowly, not quickly, just moving from past to future, and you are carried along with it. That feeling is so constant, so familiar, that you never stop to question it. There is always a now, a moment you are inside of, a thin edge between what has already happened and what has not yet happened. It feels real, solid, undeniable. But that feeling is not coming from the universe. It is coming from you. Because physics does not contain a moving present. There is no universal now sweeping across reality. No invisible line dividing past and future that everyone agrees on. In fact, when you look closely, the idea of a shared present begins to fall apart completely. Two observers moving differently do not agree on what is happening right now. Events that seem simultaneous to one observer are not simultaneous to another. So whose now is the real one? There is no answer. Because the question assumes something that does not exist. You imagine time as a sequence unfolding for everyone. But reality does not unfold that way. There is no master clock ticking in the background, no cosmic present updating itself across the universe. Instead, there are only events and relationships between them. What you call now is just a slice your brain constructs, a local ordering of events based on how information reaches you. It feels like a moving edge, but that motion is not in time itself. It is in your perception. Your brain processes information in sequence. It builds continuity. It stitches moments together into something that feels like flow. But that flow is not a property of the universe. It is a property of how you experience it. And once you see that, something quiet but unsettling happens. Because the present moment, the thing you feel most certain about, loses its status. It is no longer a universal truth, just a perspective, a constructed viewpoint, a way of organizing experience. So the idea that time is passing, that you are moving forward through it, starts to look less like a fact and more like an assumption you never noticed you were making. There is no universal clock. You assume there is a single time, a shared ticking, a universal rhythm that everything follows. Even if you never say it out loud, you feel it. You imagine that somewhere, behind all motion, behind all events, there is a clock keeping everything synchronized, not literally visible, but real. Because how else could reality stay consistent? How else could events happen in order? That assumption feels necessary, but it is not true. There is no universal clock, no single timeline that everything belongs to. Instead, every observer carries their own time, their own clock. And those clocks do not agree, not because they are broken, because reality does not require them to agree. Imagine two observers, one standing still, one moving at high speed. Each has a clock, each measures time. From their own perspective, everything feels normal. Seconds pass as they always do, nothing seems distorted. But when they compare their clocks, something strange appears. They disagree, not slightly, fundamentally. The moving observer's clock shows less time has passed, and both measurements are correct. This is not an illusion, not a mistake. Time itself has behaved differently for each of them. Now your intuition resists this. You want to believe there must be a real time underneath, a correct answer hidden somewhere. But there isn't. There is no deeper clock resolving the difference, because time is not something that exists independently of motion. It is tied to it, dependent on it, which means the idea of a shared timeline collapses. There is no single sequence of events that everyone agrees on, no universal before and after that applies everywhere. Only local measurements, local experiences, each observer building their own version of time based on their motion. And once you accept that, something shifts, because now reality is no longer unfolding along one timeline. It becomes fragmented, not chaotic, but relative, structured in a way that depends on perspective. So when you ask, what time is it right now? The question loses meaning at a fundamental level. Right now? Where? Right now? For whom? There is no global answer, only answers tied to specific observers. Feynman did not try to simplify this into something comfortable. He accepted that time is not a universal backdrop. It is not a shared stage. It is something each observer carries with them. And that realization quietly removes one of your deepest assumptions. That reality is happening in sync, because it isn't. It never was. Motion breaks. Time. You still think motion happens in time. That time exists first. And objects move through it, separate, independent. But that picture does not survive, because motion does not just happen within time. It changes it. You already saw the hint of this. Two observers, two clocks, two different amounts of time, but now look closer. The difference is not accidental. It is built into the structure of reality. The faster you move, the more time begins to shift. Not visually, not psychologically, physically. Your clock slows down relative to others. Your processes take longer from an outside perspective. Your entire experience stretches against the timeline of someone who is not moving like you. And here is the part your intuition struggles with. From your perspective, nothing changes. Your thoughts feel normal. Your heartbeat feels normal. Time still seems to pass the same way. So you are forced into a contradiction. You feel unchanged, but to someone else, you are not. So which version is real? Both. And that is the problem, because you wanted time to be something absolute. Something that exists the same way for everyone. But motion has broken that assumption completely. Time is no longer independent. It is tied to how you move. So now imagine pushing this further, not small speeds, not everyday motion, extreme motion, close to the speed of light. As you approach it, the effect does not stay small. It becomes dominant. Time slows dramatically. From your perspective, distant journeys begin to compress. What would take years for someone else may take far less for you. Not because you are traveling faster in a simple sense, but because time itself is no longer behaving the same way. So now motion is no longer just movement through space. It is a transformation of time. And that changes the meaning of everything. Because if time depends on motion, then duration is no longer a fixed property. It becomes relative, context dependent. And once that happens, the idea of a shared reality weakens further. Because people moving differently are not just in different positions. They are in different experiences of time. Feynman understood this without trying to soften it. He didn't ask how to fix the intuition. He followed the logic. And the logic leads somewhere uncomfortable, because once motion can change time, you can no longer treat time as a stable backdrop. It becomes part of the system, flexible, dependent, and no longer guaranteed to behave the way you expect. Gravity distorts time itself. You might still believe there is one place time remains untouched. Even if motion changes it, even if observers disagree, you may still think at least time itself is separate from the physical world. At least it flows the same regardless of what exists. That assumption does not survive either, because gravity does not just pull on objects, it pulls on time. This is where your intuition begins to fail more completely. You are used to thinking of gravity as a force, something that attracts masses toward each other. But at a deeper level, gravity is not just pulling things. It is reshaping space-time itself. And when space-time changes, time changes with it. Closer to a massive object, time slows down. Not metaphorically, not as an illusion, physically. A clock near a massive body ticks more slowly than a clock far away. And again, both clocks are correct. Each measures time normally in its own location, but when you compare them, they disagree. So now time depends not just on motion, but on where you are. How deep you are in a gravitational field, and this creates another quiet contradiction, because you expected time to be universal, or at least stable in some regions, but now it varies across space itself. Near a planet, time is slightly slower. Near a star, slower still. Near a black hole, dramatically slower. So two identical clocks, placed in different gravitational environments, will no longer stay synchronized. Not because something is wrong with them, because time itself is different in those locations. Now pause and consider what that means. You are no longer dealing with a single time, or even a time that only depends on motion. You are dealing with a system where time is shaped by the structure of the universe, by mass, by energy, by geometry. So time is not a background, it is part of the environment. And that removes another layer of certainty, because now there is no place where time is guaranteed to behave normally. No reference point you can rely on. No absolute standard. Feynman didn't try to bring time back into something simple. He accepted that it is woven into the same fabric as space, so tightly connected that changing one changes the other, which means time is no longer something that exists on its own. It is inseparable from the structure of reality, and once you accept that, the idea of time as a steady, universal flow becomes impossible to maintain. It was never flowing the way you thought, it was always being shaped. The past and future are not separate. You still believe in a difference between past and future. You feel it constantly. The past is fixed, the future is open, and the present is the point where one turns into the other. That structure feels undeniable because it matches your experience. You remember the past, you don't remember the future. So they must be fundamentally different, but that conclusion does not come from physics. It comes from how your mind works. Because when you look at the structure of time itself, without your perspective imposed on it, the distinction begins to dissolve. In relativity, time is treated as another dimension, not identical to space, but part of the same structure. Space-time. And in that structure, events are not coming into existence, and they are simply located, just like positions in space. This leads to a view that feels deeply uncomfortable, that past, present, and future are not separate things. They are all part of the same structure, or already there, not unfolding, not appearing, just existing in different locations within space-time. Now your intuition resists this immediately, because it feels like it removes change, it feels like it freezes reality into something static. But that reaction comes from the way you experience time, not from how time is structured, because from within your perspective you move through events in a sequence. You experience one moment, then another, and your brain builds a sense of flow. But that does not mean the flow exists independently. It may only reflect how your consciousness navigates the structure. Like reading a book, the story unfolds as you read it, page by page. But the entire story already exists, beginning, middle, and end, not appearing, not forming, just there. And your experience of progression comes from how you move through it, not from the story being created in real time. This is the idea that begins to replace your intuition, that time does not flow, that the future is not becoming, that the past is not gone. They are all equally part of the structure, and your sense of movement is something else entirely. Feynman didn't present this as a comforting idea, because it isn't. It removes the privilege of the present moment. It removes the idea that reality is unfolding in a way centered around you. Instead, it suggests that what you call now is just one position among many, no more special than any other. And once that settles in, something shifts. Because the difference between past and future, something you felt was fundamental, begins to look like a feature of perception, not a feature of reality itself. Cause and effect begin to blur. You still trust one thing. Cause comes before effect, always. First something happens, then something else follows. That order feels absolute. Because without it, nothing makes sense. No sequence, no explanation, no structure. So you assume that even if time behaves strangely, even if observers disagree, cause and effect must remain intact. But even that begins to shift. Not completely, but enough to break your confidence. Because once you lose a universal timeline, once different observers disagree on what happens at the same time, the ordering of events becomes less stable than you expect. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may not be simultaneous to another. And if simultaneity is not absolute, then the order between events that are far apart becomes uncertain. Now be careful. This does not mean anything can cause anything. Physics still protects causality in a strict sense. You cannot send information backward in time. You cannot create contradictions. But the structure around cause and effect is not as clean as your intuition suggests, because you are relying on a global ordering. A single timeline where every event has a definite position relative to every other event. That timeline does not exist. So for events separated in space, events that cannot influence each other, the question of which happened first can depend on the observer. One observer may say A happened before B. Another may say B happened before A. And neither is wrong, because there is no universal ordering to resolve the difference. So now your idea of sequence begins to fracture, not at the level of direct cause and effect, but at the level of global structure. There is no single story unfolding in a fixed order for the entire universe. Only local chains of cause and effect, each valid within its own frame, but not necessarily consistent with a single global timeline. And that creates a subtle instability, because you expected reality to behave like a story, one event leading to another in a clear shared sequence. But instead, reality behaves more like a network. Local connections, local orderings, but no single universal narrative tying everything together. Feynman understood that physics does not promise a clean story. It only defines relationships, and once you lose a universal before and after, even the structure of explanation begins to change, not collapsing, but becoming more limited, more local, more dependent on perspective. So cause and effect survive. But the idea that they form one coherent timeline across the universe does not. Your experience of time is not reality. You still trust your experience, even now. Even after everything, after losing a universal clock, after watching time bend with motion and gravity, you still feel time moving. You feel it right now, moment to moment, second to second. That feeling hasn't changed. And because it hasn't changed, you assume it must be real. At least at some level. At least as a reflection of what time actually is, but it isn't. Your experience of time is not a window into reality. It is a construction. Your brain does not perceive time directly. It assembles it, piece by piece, from incoming signals, from memory, from prediction. It takes events and arranges them into a sequence, a flowing sequence, one that feels continuous, one that feels directional. But that flow is not something it observes. It is something it creates, because your brain cannot process everything at once. It needs order. It needs progression. So it builds a moving present, a shifting now that feels like it is advancing forward. But that advancement is not happening in the universe. It is happening in you. And this is where the separation becomes clear. Physics describes relationships between events, not experiences, not feelings, not the sense of time passing. Those belong to the system interpreting the events, not to the events themselves. So what you call the present moment is not a universal feature, it is a local construct.